debut, John Patitucci.
Thanks for coming. It's really, I'm really thankful to do this here at David's place. David and I have known each other for quite a while. On top of him knowing how to deal with bass as well as he does and understand how to get the most out of any instrument, we've become friends over the years. And this is an important thing to both of us in terms of sharing, getting bassists together and sharing ideas and growing together, actually, as a community. So I'm extremely happy also that it's an intimate setting. We didn't want to have like a real slick kind of thing here. So this is really great, and I'm glad you're here. For me, dealing with this instrument and dealing with the idea of finally making a video on this instrument, I was struck by the idea that I really wanted to share some very practical realities about the instrument in terms of dealing with the bass and actually working and eating from the bass. And, but also, we're going to open it up for questions, and we're going to deal with as many concepts as we can get to tonight. So I'd like to begin, first of all, with some of the non-negotiables in my book. Time is at the top of the list because I feel like, especially on this instrument, pitch obviously is a huge challenge. But even if you play beautifully in tune and your time is horrible, chances are that people will hire somebody, even maybe with not as good pitch, especially in jazz. Sometimes guys will get hired because they have just a great time feel. And that's it. Maybe even their note choice isn't terrific and their pitch is a little funny. But when they play, there's a feeling and a beat that's wide, and you could drive a truck through it, you know, and it really feels good. It makes people want to play. Now, I'm not saying that it's good to just have that and not those other things. I think you need all of them. There's a little bit of a myth sometimes with jazz that guys think, well, if I just play acoustic bass in jazz, I don't really have to be as good as a classical guy or, you know, study all that stuff. Well, actually, I think it's the reverse. You kind of have to do more. In my experience, I've studied classically a lot, and I still do. And I feel like you need all the tools to deal with the instrument and the mechanics of the instrument. Then on top of that, you need my next thing, and that is, so you need time and pitch, but you need ears. And the ear training involved in playing this instrument, not just dealing with it in tune and all that, but understanding harmony and dealing with concepts that are broad, like just in terms of doing a foundation function in a group as a bassist on this instrument, in terms of playing walking bass lines and providing foundation. You have to think like a composer. You have to know about harmony. You have to have ears that can discern the difference between harmony as it hits you, and you've got milliseconds going here, and there's no time to think about, was that a minor 7 or a half diminished chord? You have to really know that and react to it in an emotional way so you don't sound too cerebral, and at the same time you have to sort of have gained all this information somehow. You have to work hard and be like, a bass player has to be like a composer then. So, along with having a great feel, a great beat, a great sense of pitch, a great set of ears that can understand harmony, and then the taste to know how to support the other musicians and play what is needed and what sets everybody up to play well. And you have to be selfless to do that. A lot of guys, you know, when we all get excited coming up, we're working on trying to expand on the instrument and get technique together. One of the classic stories, there was a young bass player, who I won't name, thank God it wasn't me. He was playing with Stan Getz, and at the break, Stan Getz took the bass player aside and goes, "Look, kid, you and I, we need a bass player on this gig." And that would be a rough thing, you know. But I just share that to say that, look, the meat and potatoes of this instrument is really playing time in a very musical way, making decisions that make everybody sound good. Now, it's an easy thing to talk about, but it's not the easiest thing to do sometimes. So that's the ear training part of it, in terms of being able to hear, respond, and still play foundationally for the group. And then your ears take on another level of depth when you have to improvise and somebody's playing different sets of changes and you have to be lyrical and create melodies on the spot. So it's not like you have a chance to work anything out. You have to react, you have to play emotionally, and it's all happening like that. So, in my opinion, to deal with this instrument in a jazz situation, hopefully you've studied the instrument in the classical sense so you can deal with the instrument and there's nothing in the way of you trying to express yourself. Technique is supposed to just serve the music, right? So, the ears set you up for that. And then the last thing is your eyes have to work pretty well. It's really better if you learn how to read music. And for many people, it was for me a big stumbling block when I started. I played completely by ear and I had to learn how to read music. And thank God I did, because a whole world of literature, of music, and composers opened up to me. I could play with people that were very into writing things down and stuff that I couldn't have heard. I mean, at some point you get to a point with your ear where it's not possible to, on the spot, ascertain everything that's happening in the music and deal with it without having a little something to read there. So, okay. Now, in terms of time, I'm going back to the first one. Dynamics and articulation and the very combination of those things is what is going to make something swing. It's some of the elements of what makes it swing. Swing is a very almost undefinable word. It depends. It's about emotions, about how you feel. It's about having a sturdy and a kind of a solid time feel that people can just feel the song just from you. That's a bass player's goal. We have to stand alone and be able to deal with it. We have to be able to say, if we're going to play something like Stella by Starlight, we have to be able to say, of the tune there. Hopefully you could. In other words, now I'm going to do that with J. I'm just going to play in two. The basis of learning how to play in a jazz context in terms of walking bass begins with how you play a two-feel. Two-feel is just in a two-beat kind of way. You're not playing 4/4, you're not playing 4 to a bar. And it's an open style. And the beginning of, to me, of walking bass is you study the bass lines of Bach and get the idea of how that music feels. In Baroque music, the bass lines are real sturdy. They lay out the whole thing. And then, when you get into that for a while, then you got to start transcribing. You got to transcribe the masters. And there's so many. I mean, you could go back and check out some of the earlier guys that started really pushing the bass forward, like Blanton and Oscar Pettiford and everything. And then some of the greatest guys to study walking from are really Ray Brown and Ron Carter. And transcribing the way they deal with the form of a song and the way they outline the harmony. One of the things involved in that is in terms of how they use little motifs, little four-note walking patterns. And then what I used to do was analyze them. If the pattern was say it was an E half diminished. Jay, play an E half diminished for me. And say Ron or Ray, maybe they'll play the root, the minor third, the flat 5, and the third. And that's a little pattern. They go, and then maybe there's an A7. Those little patterns that they use, they're little motifs. Sometimes they string them through all the changes. In a blues, you might hear a guy, let's play F blues. Maybe he'll play 1, 2, 3, 4. That's root fifth, flat 7 octave as a pattern. Then you got to get to the next chord again. I learned how to string together all these different patterns. Every guy who walks and creates these kind of lines that we like the sound of, they have a harmonic knowledge. They can thread little patterns through the chords. They use chord tones, scale tones, passing tones. But what they do first of all is they deal with the two feel. Now, and a great exercise is play in two and limit yourself to chord tones at first. No triplets, no ornaments, just chord tones. And then maybe start doing some scale tones and then passing tones. But let's try again. Let's play Stella, and I'm just going to play in two chord tones and just really try to lock down the time. One.
Melody or solo?
Go ahead and play the melody first.
Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got to be able to discipline yourself to do that first. I've had a lot of students come to me and I say, okay, play me a line. And they're playing all this root movement sounds like somebody put like the chromatic scale on a wall and threw darts at it, like this note followed that note. And it's got to sound like you're a composer. And it's easy to talk about, but it's harder to thread the needle. You hear guys like when I hear Ron Carter or Ray Brown and these guys play through changes, it's like great composition to me. Everything sounds, it has that inevitable quality, like it had to be that way. Every phrase, every 8 bars, it just keeps getting better, you know. So we're going to play now the tune in just, I don't want to beat this to death, but this is an important thing. We're going to play Stella. I'm going to play it in 2. First time fairly simple. Towards the middle of the chorus, I'll add a few ornaments, and then when we get to the blowing, I'm going to start walking, and I'm going to still keep it fairly simple. It's always good, no matter how long you've been playing. Every once in a while, what I do is I turn the metronome on 2 and 4, and I try to play just quarter notes without ornaments to see, because sometimes you can get like real crazy with all your fills and everything, and then you can get to the point where you've strayed a little far from a deep, 4/4 feel that's really rocking the house. That's what you want. You want people to feel like, wow, when that guy walks, I feel like I could play anything I want. That's the thing that gets you hired. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Started moving around a little bit more after a while. The whole thing about dynamics in this makes a big difference. You notice all of a sudden we dropped down and did some different things. We didn't talk about it, we just did it. The way you walk and the way you articulate with the bass and the way you don't play all the notes the same level. That's the thing too. When you do a common mistake that a lot of guys, when they first starting to hear guys do triplet figures and everything, they make the triplet thing really loud, and the downbeat that comes next is sort of obscured. So you get this, and it's disruptive to the beat actually. You know, I remember when I first heard Ron Carter do all those, I started like, when I was like really into playing that, and then I heard myself back one time when it was like, these ornaments were just like in your face instead of like being a little dressing on the, you know, salad. You know, you can't. And those little things that are just the way you'll drive towards the downbeat, or you drive towards the top of a chorus or an end of an 8-bar phrase. You don't play everything the same. The bass line has to move up and down in dynamics and shape, in inflection. You don't play all the notes hard. You don't connect them all the same way. You slide. You have to have different articulations at your disposal. This really comes into play when you're walking, and then when you start improvising, it gets really big time important. When you hear some bass players, when they play their solos, they play all the notes the same. So after a while, it's like, well, how come when I hear a saxophone player, they have all these scoops and they ghost notes and they swallow things and they slide and they do all these real vocal effects? Well, we should be able to do that too. And there's obviously some great bass players that know all that. You know, so that should be your objective too. Now, any questions on this? I want to keep it open and loose. I don't want to just lecture the whole time, because I know there's a lot of guys that play, and maybe even some people that do some teaching here. So, any questions on what we've been talking about, and maybe other things too? Anything yet? Yeah.
Yeah, John. I teach, and I had a student one time who into that. I mean, he had very high action on his instrument, and he was into very forceful concept of playing the bass. And he came in, he worked up
Yours, sure.
And he played it for me, and it came out pa pa pum pa 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 pum pum.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So I mean, how do you impart that? I mean, I have some ideas, but I was really interested in how you would impart. You know.
One thing I would say, how I learned it was listening to so many records that it was unbelievable. I mean, I was saturating myself. And I would say, if you're going to learn Joy Spring, then you have to learn Clifford Brown. You have to go to that recording in the 50s, or whenever that was, they did that. Yeah. And listen, because that's a study in dynamics. Like when he goes, that isn't loud. You know, like you have to, some notes get emphasis, some don't, unless you really listen to it. Like when I first heard Bird, and all, you know, man, you know, all the phrasing. You know. He doesn't pick everything. You can, but that doesn't sound as hip. You know, when you slur like horn players, they have articulations in their back pocket that we have to gain. You know, the bass is not friendly to that sort of stuff, first of all. We have to practice that stuff slow and really get the idea of not every note gets the same touch from us. And your whole touch and your sensitivity is it's your calling card on the bass. When you hear somebody like Charlie Hayden, he strikes one note. You know, it's like, or Dave Holland, he gets, you know, Ron, Ray. There's a million guys that you can point to that you go, wow. When you hear them, you know it's them. They have a touch. You know, when they hit a note, it's not all the same thing. So, to play like in that style, in the bebop style, you have to kind of really digest all the horn players. I used to listen a lot to Dexter too, and of course Bird and Dizzy, and listen to Dexter Gordon and Lester Young, and actually it all starts with Louis Armstrong, the way he started phrasing melodies, and from there it was just like it was like jazz history before Armstrong was sort of whatever it was, and then it was very negligible in some ways. I mean, in terms of that kind of phrasing, that freedom that he played with. That was a thing that set it all in motion. It was like somebody dropped a ball and it just kept bouncing for the next, you know, decades and decades, you know, and it's evolved into this thing, you know. Mm-hmm. That idea of being able to lay back on the beat, like if I put a little beat on the metronome, and that's the other thing too, that bass players, we have to learn how to do is lay back on the time when we play. A lot of times, because it's so physical, we tend to rush when we're trying to play a line. So, at that tempo, Pops would say, that's not just trumpet there. I went into bass. Okay, so you get guys like, when you hear Ray play a blues, I'm playing around with the time. You hear the 2 and 4, and I'm trying my best never to get nervous with it. You know, there's an anxious feeling that happens when we get into what we're trying to do technically on the bass, and then we don't deliver the goods because we get caught up in trying to just get the stinking line that we're hearing out, right? And sometimes it really, we have to learn how to relax and be able to lay back on the time. That's especially true on fast tempos. Because then there's the other aspect of it too. You could be playing with guys, sometimes, and we've all experienced this, where you're playing, supporting everybody, then it's your solo, and maybe the drummer sort of lays out or plays barely anything. The piano player gets tentative, and all of a sudden the time gets turned around, and you're going, it was like I was holding my end of the bargain up for you guys. What happened? Or in our anxiousness, maybe it's our turn to play, and we get excited and we start like moving the time forward, and then everybody's kind of like gets a little backs off and doesn't know what to do because we've stretched the envelope a little bit too far. It's far better to lay back on it than to when you're blowing. Like check out Dexter Gordon. He played so far back he almost fell off the beat every phrase he played. And it was like a rubber band. It kept on. He'd catch up and then pull back and. That kind of stuff is important, whether you're playing a bass line or whether you're playing a solo. Because if you're playing, a bass line, let's say, just play an F blues, and I'm going to just play a different kind, almost like a 6/8 bass line. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm targeting certain notes. In other words, I'm not just playing everything the same. It makes it, the line has shape to it. You have to shape everything. In classical music, you learn this big time. When somebody plays, and you hear Isaac Perlman or one of these guys play a melody, and they shape a phrase of a Mozart piece or something like that, it sounds like a vocal, it sounds like somebody singing. And even though we're on the bottom sometimes, we have to have that foundational thing, and we're supposed to be the bedrock of the rhythm section. But that doesn't mean that we don't play with finesse and phrase and play dynamics, and it's not just, we're not just a drum with strings on it, but at the same time, we have to have that strength. We have to be another drummer in the group. We have to have that lock in the time so that, there's no doubt about where it is. That's a big thing with the bass. We've all been in situations where the person playing with us really made us feel freer to play, and we didn't have to pound all night, or we could play with, it's a drag when you have to, when you're just struggling. If you can have somebody to play with that's, focused on the whole and not just what they're individually doing, that's what makes it much better. And as bass players, we have to do that too. That brings us to another thing, ballad playing. Any questions about ballad playing? That's a big subject, and that's a thing that I remember one of the first times I made a record with somebody and I played a ballad, and I think it was Easy Living or something, and I heard it back, and I noticed that I kept playing the same ridiculous triplet fill, and I was like, oh man, I got to go back and learn how to play ballads. Ballads are some of the hardest things to play on the bass in a way, because not only are you exposed pitch-wise and time-wise, but every decision you make harmonically, every little thing that you do is immediately known to all. There's nowhere to hide.
Well, since it's a great subject, what would you work on, or what do you work on, to break up your ballad playing, your time feel, and your harmonic thing?
Okay, that's a good question. Jay and I were talking about this afternoon. A lot of what I do sometime with these things is I'll like what I did before. I put on the metronome and see how I can phrase and still be solid, but have some leeway around the beat too. Now you got to be careful with a ballad. I mean, and you have to know who you're playing with too, and what the setting is, and how far they want to stretch things. A lot of times in a ballad, in a traditional ballad, we have to be, we still have to hold down the time. Like the worst thing the bass player can do is if everybody's floating and the people don't want you to float, they just want somebody to keep some time while they dress up the ballad. Like if somebody's playing like the way I was playing the melody, if I was playing bass underneath that melody for solos, and you notice when I got under his solo, I tried to play pretty sturdy and just sort of like let some space go by, don't fill everything, so that when you do a little fill, it matters more. And also, just the idea of being able to freely switch back and forth between a real in one, like serious ballad, to a little bit of a two feel, to sometimes people might want to go double time. A lot of times the mark of an immature musician is when the guy's always going double time. Like every ballad has to get to double time, and then it's the guys are, piano players like rolling his eye, like that. So that's one thing to try to avoid falling into. And I think we all, at one point or another, when we're learning how to do that, we get excited because we learn how to play like, okay, I can play straight time, and I can play a little two broken up, and then I can double it up, and you get all these options, and you get excited, and you want to try them all the time, But the thing is I guess the most important rule with ballads is always you got to play to who you're playing with. You can't come in with a preconceived way of playing that song. You have to listen to what people are doing around you, and also realize that you have to be foundational. That's one thing I learned. I've done some gigs with Herbie Hancock in a trio situation, and he plays the stuff he plays, sometimes it sounds like he's got a harp there. He's playing all these beautiful things. Now, he's expecting me to mark time, and also be free enough harmonically to go where he goes. But he doesn't want me to abandon the thing unless he says, okay, we're going to play a rubato ballad and it's totally free. You have to sort of do your job. You have to be sort of firmly laying the time down without being too demonstrative about it. Otherwise, it really sounds like you're marking time. You have to mark the time for everybody without it being too obvious. Like, in other words, if we're playing this tune, and say in a traditional way, I'm going to play it very traditional way. Play the melody now. 1, 2, 3. See, I'm not hinting double time. And I'm thinking subdivision. You can either think triplets, or you can just think quarter notes and really get your body slowed down. Then maybe. That's the starting point, right? Now we're going to play the A section again. Second A. And maybe. But without doing too much double time, maybe somebody. You imply a little bit. But still not too much. Not all at once, in other words. So that leaves air, like, for everybody. So you're not forcing everybody to play double time, but you're just playing a triplet fiddle. And that make more double time. I'm walking into things, I'm leading into things in a very obvious way. It's nothing terribly, fancy about that, but it's what's required. Then you can hit. And then when you do something, it means more because you've been laying down the pipe, you've been laying the foundation, and then what happens is if you start the ballad, and you're playing too much stuff, you got nowhere to go. And on the other hand, if you play the whole ballad with no lead-ins and things, then people are starting to go, hey, come on, you need to shape this tune. You can't just be an automatic pilot either. So it's really that learning the judgment of being able to play enough without playing too much. And in different situations, I play with some people who like less. Some people are constantly telling me more, I want more. But even then, you have to go up to the limit where you feel comfortable. I mean, it's still you playing.
Right. It's totally on the situation.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And the more sensitive you are, that's also what can get you hired all the time, really. People want a bass player that's going to really lay down the time and everything, but who's also flexible, because with the bass, you can change the nature of the whole tune with choosing a different bass note. You can change the direction. If everybody's playing real intuitively, you play one bass note a different way, and then we're off in another way, another direction. So, another question.
Yeah, the other question about pedal tones.
Yes.
The first 2 measures of that tune would seem to be a good place for a pedal tone. If you were going to select a pedal tone, say on your own without a suggestion from whoever's
Sure.
playing harmonically, what would you select?
Well, that one, starts on a C minor and it goes to a G altered, so the natural G pedal tone for the first part of the tune is fine. And the other thing that's nice, though, which I learned from listening to different guys and Ron Carter and various people, is when you have a 2/5, like a C minor to F, play the 5 like the whole way through it. So it makes the C a sus chord, like it opens things up. That's a real basic one. There's other ones too. I mean, you have to just, again, use your ears and decide whether the situation calls for it or not too. Because when I started learning how to do pedal points too, there were some times where I was just putting pedals everywhere, and the piano player was like, "Yeah, great. Okay, another, come on." So it's always about really being sensitive to the situation. Not so much that you're afraid to try something, but that you don't overuse different devices. So that you're not going through a whole night putting a pedal on everything and everything's a sus, and I had fun. I mean, especially first time somebody said, "Look, you could try this," and I got into it, and I was like, "Wow, that means that this could happen." And then you get pedal crazy,
Piano player wants to kill.
Yeah, the piano player ready to strangle you because you removed any concept of chord changes because you're just pedaling it.
You get a gorgeous tone out of the instrument. And in observing a lot of different bass players, I've noticed that there is never really most players develop some sort of standard right hand fingering, the side of their finger, the tips of their finger,
right.
maybe with the thumb. I saw Red Mitchell do all kind of things to draw sounds out of the bass. But there are other kind of players who are very specific. They stay in one place, and they're great at what they do. As you said earlier about Ray Brown, Dave Holland, and Ron Carter, they all have a specific sound and get every time. Do you have a way of thinking about when you're going to use two fingers, the side of your finger, or?
I don't really think about it much. I know that as a general rule, when I'm walking, if up to pretty fast tempos, I try to, as much as I can, use the side to make it fatter sounding. And then if it gets too fast where I have to keep switching back, stamina-wise, and when I blow, sometimes I'm still using that side of the finger, and then I'll flip it over if I have to play something that moves around a little bit. But I don't try to make it a thing that's worked out. I did practice coming up, different, with the metronome, trying to play, different subdivisions of the beat, quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, all the usual stuff, and alternating. But I don't do strict alternating picking. I don't know many guys that really do on the bass, to tell you the truth. This finger's longer, first of all. A lot of times you wind up leading with this finger. And I'm on top of it, I'm lefty. So I'm playing right-handed, but a lot of times I'm leading. This hand is leading in some ways. I mean, this hand is still the time. I mean, if you don't play time with your right hand, this could be doing all kinds of interesting things that people would just be like, because it wouldn't be in time, and sort of kind of negates all that stuff that you're trying to do. But the rule of thumb, I have my action set up medium. It's not real low right now. It's sort of floated up over the, David could tell you, when I first started coming to him, I think it used to be quite a bit lower. That was 10 years ago.
5 millimeters, now you're about 7.
And it got a little, I just kind of, and I went to heavy strings too. These are heavy gauge, the Dario helichords, just because I wanted to just get a darker sound. This instrument is very full sounding, and it doesn't have a problem cutting through. It's only maybe 40 years old or something, maybe. And so it doesn't have a problem with focus and point to the sound. So I was trying to get a darker sound, so I'm using heavier strings, and I'm trying to and I've gotten more comfortable with my action a little higher so that I can dig in and I have a lot of play dynamically. Not so high that I'm not an advocate of, like, some guys went really crazy with that and they went back and just started really cranking their action up and hammering away. And sometimes it sounds really good, but I found that if you want to use the whole bass, when you get up here, if it's too high and you start like hammering, there's no subtlety anymore. You can't really, you're really muscling the bass. This is pretty healthily high, and it's enough. I mean, with each person, you're going to find that sweet spot where it's good for you. But the right arm, I try to a lot of it is just having your body relaxed and using the weight of your arm and that little snap of the wrist and the forearm, so that you can relax and draw a sound out of the bass. It's really drawing. It's pretty relaxed, and I'm using the weight. I have fat fingers anyway, so maybe that's good. When I was coming up and seeing guys play, that had big long fingers, I thought, oh God, that's it. I'm never going to be a good bass player because I don't have long, thin fingers. And then I had my first classical teacher was Charles Ciani in San Francisco. He's a great bass player, and he had like big sausages. So I said, oh look, he's got. Then I had hope. But the deal is on that is everybody's got their own way of dealing with the right hand. The thing to do, the most important thing about it is to not have tension in your arm, because then guys get really messed up and have tendonitis problems and different things. And you got to keep yourself loose and use the weight of the arm. If you see somebody really like straining a lot to play the bass, sometimes that's not a healthy sign. Eventually, they're going to pay some dues with that. You can get plenty of big sound. I mean, look at there's a lot of guys that have proven that had moderate setups. I think Milt Hinton had a pretty moderate setup, right? Ray Brown certainly has a moderate setup. Ron Carter. They get nice sounds, beautiful sounds, big sounds. It's really about hearing the sound in your head. I mean, we have Larry Ridley here tonight, who is also one of the guys that I listen to coming up. So that's great. I mean, he can tell you about the evolution that went on when they went from gut strings to steel strings and how it changed things too. I happen to like all those sounds, by the way, too. I'm not one of those guys that says, well, steel is the only way. I love the sound of gut strings. Just for me, a lot of times the springiness and also the pitch, keeping them in tune is a little bit more of a thing that I haven't been willing to go for. I love the sound of them, though. I love those olives, and it's great sounding string.
Yeah, John, do you always sit and play?
No, sometimes I stand too. At one point, one of my teachers was saying, you really ought to learn how to stand and play too, because what happens when something happens to your stool and you forget it or whatever. And I feel comfortable playing too, and I actually keep I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but I even keep the spike around the same place. And I just play like this.
Have you ever played cello?
No, my wife plays the cello. And I love the cello. But I never played it. I love those records with Oscar Pettiford where he plays it. I think those are incredible, actually. And he really played in tune, too. I mean, he really played it well. I wonder if he tuned it in fourths.
I think he tuned it.
Because he sounded real comfortable. Yeah. Another question. Yeah, up here first.
John, I see you, as I'm looking at you playing and watching your ears and your eyes with the guitar player, is you very, very, very carefully are listening and reacting, and not only to your co-players, but also in what you have in your mind. You have a concept of the way you want this tune to sound.
Sure.
And that's got to be a very, very long evolutionary process. But how have you come along and developed that for yourself?
That's a great question. Ear training, in my opinion, is one of the big deficiencies in the way a lot of education has been run. Like when I was in my teens, I went to some of these Jamie Ebersol camps and I encountered David Baker. And he taught me some things that really set me up, that really changed the way I thought about things. I was an ear player to start with. I could hear things, but he taught me to hear the difference between all the chords, like really know the difference between a 13 chord with a sharp 11 chord, or a minor 9, or a 13 chord with a flat 9. He actually drilled us till the point where he would go to the piano and go, boom, sing, and we'd have to find the root and sing the scale that went through the chord. This kind of stuff is really important. If you want to be an improvising musician, if you want to play jazz or any of the musics that are connected with jazz, the let's say non-European classical music, you have to be able to have an ear that can tell the difference. And this is not, more recently, universities are dealing with this now and different things are happening, but used to be not the case at all. And in fact, even though there is programs and people are trying to teach this thing, it's really up to the individual to really work on this. And this is not something that happens overnight. And what I did was a ton of transcribing, which is, see, jazz is also an oral tradition, A-U-R-A-L. It's been passed down. It's a listening thing. It's being able to deal with harmonies that are a little bit more extended in the moment. That's really what it is. And even if you know intellectually how to play over a chord change, this is the thing I say to my students all the time, you can know all the theoretical part of it. But if you don't hear the sounds and are not feeling and thinking of melodies, and you're not free enough to think that way, well, then you wind up sounding like a textbook, because you know the right scale, and maybe you can play it, but could you sing it? You know, do you really have the sound inside your heart? It's a different reality. And that's what I've been working on. Well, since I met him, I must have met him when I was 15, and I'm 41 years old. So I just, you know, it's interesting. You have somebody who can set you in the right direction. He really helped me enormously. And in fact, just from having him 2 weeks out of my life changed the way I approach ear training. And what I did after that was I got one of his books that has him striking a chord, and then you have to sing the scale and play. And then I got to the point where, like, you know, if I heard somebody play a chord, then I could just, wherever I was on the instrument, I could find notes within that sound. So then the whole board becomes the sound. Somebody plays a minor 7 chord. Jay, play a minor 7 chord, anyone, I don't care. Play the dominant chord with a sharp 11 after. You know, that's the thing. You want to be able to hear the difference. And start anywhere, so that you can, if you happen to be in this place on your bass, this is the other thing too about walking too that trains your ear. You should be able to walk a whole blues in half position and have things sound good. It's a function of your ear. You have to be able to hear and know the harmony. Well, once you start getting into changes in it and be able to hear them, then you can create melodies instead of just always start like, you can tell when somebody's a beginning improviser, they start every chord from the root. Like somebody plays a chord, they start on the root and start ideas from the root. Horn players don't do that. You don't hear tenor players. When the chord changes, they're in a melody somewhere. They might be on the 7th, they might be on the 9th, they might be on the 11th, they might be on. So, just from those 2 summers, he got me going in that. And actually, when I went to study, I was a classical bass major at college for a few years before I went on the road. And I went to the placement thing, you know, and I took my ear training test, and I didn't have to take ear training in college because of David Baker. I tested out. And it's because he taught me how to hear sounds and the colors of sounds. Like, you know, he would just sit there and play voicings, and they weren't root position either, so you really had to hear, what is that chord, you know? And that's the way to do it. Because then it becomes a thing where Jay, just play another chord. And then it becomes a thing where you react to the sound and the color of the sound. So that's a Lydian sound. It's a major with a plus 11, right? So you're reacting to the sound instead of, and I was just sort of finding the notes, using my ear to find the notes even, not even starting to think analytically like, even which one is it? It was E flat though, right? Yeah. So at first I was just hearing the sound and going, okay, what fits? So instead of thinking always from a theoretical, analytical, cerebral way, you want to get it to the point where you can, sure, you need to know stuff. I mean, you need to be able to, ideally, this also teaches you, then when you look at a set of changes, this is the good reverse part about it. If you get your ear to that place, when I see changes on a piece of paper with alterations, I know what it's going to sound like before they play the chord now, because I know that a 13 chord with a flat 9 has this sort of feeling and a color to it. And you start to like gain a connection to the chords as opposed to, just kind of wondering, oh, what is that chord again? And, it does take a lot of memorization too and all that sort of, there are very few people that can hear all this stuff without hard work. I've met some, and it's just intimidating. The guy's got perfect pitch. I used to play with a saxophone player like that in California. He had perfect pitch, so if you went bang on he not only knew what kind of chord it was, he knew what the notes were that you were playing. And he was off. He was just able to. The rest of us have to sort of learn about harmony.
Did you experience the same thing, that when you started writing, that really increased your
Yes.
I encourage everybody
Compose.
to write, because that puts you
For
on
me, a
the
big
side.
time. And actually, that coincided with me. Actually, even there was a step before I had written some pieces when I was very young. I started writing tunes. But, not that they were any good either, but I started writing when I was about 12. But then somebody started hitting me to the piano and showed me some voicings. When I must have been around 15 or something. And then they started showing me, that's when, once I started playing the piano and dealing with that, then I started writing tunes. Then I started understanding the chords better, then my ear got better, and it all fed each other because, in my opinion, if you really want to be a well-rounded musician on the bass, the piano is really your ticket there kind of thing. And you hear some guys, some guys wind up in the process getting pretty good. I'm not really one of those guys. I'm not a great piano player, but some of these guys get really good at the piano. There's a guy up in Canada named Don Thompson. He plays piano like Bill Evans, and he plays vibes. Plays pretty good bass too. But I think it's a great instrument, and it really opens up things. A lot of times when I'm learning a new tune or I'm working on a harmonic thing that's a little tricky, I can sometimes find and hear a lot more stuff when I'm at the piano, and then I sort of have to transfer it. We talked about a lot of foundational way to play time and different stuff. There's also the thing about breaking up the time. Sometimes you play with people and they want a more open thing, and Paul Chambers and a lot of guys early on started sort of breaking up the time, and then of course Scott LaFaro got famous for doing it enough. But Ron Carter also had a way of doing it that was unbelievable, I thought. So I think when you break up the time and get into that style of playing, the internal clock has to work pretty well inside you. So let me show you one thing. I'll play a little bit by myself. I'm going to play alone together without Jay first. Let's see. That in there. That's 2 and 4. So, in other words, I'm not going to play a standard 2-feel or a 4-4, but I'm going to break it up. Let me just get solid here. And against the time. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Abstract maybe to hear the tune that way, but 1, 2, here's the melody, 1, 2, 3, 4. sometimes people are looking for that kind of open thing, like when Bill Evans' trio came out. It was the idea that everybody's voice in the trio was equal. I was deliberately playing a bunch of stuff, more than I would probably usually play, just to illustrate the way to break it up. I wasn't. You notice I was playing triplet things against the time, but I was always coming back. I wasn't like totally abandoning the time up, but I was breaking up the rhythm so that it creates just a different feeling in the music. Now I'm going to do it a little bit more, just a little bit more subtly, and I'll show you. I'll incorporate bits of it, in other words. That was exaggerated just to show you the concept. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. You can make a lot of choices, and obviously I'm free to do that in a duo setting too. I mean, it's more open, and he has great time, so I don't have to worry about him getting lost, or he can do things to me, and hopefully I won't get lost. And the whole idea is that when you have trust, and it's this intimate setting like that, you can do a little bit more. You can be a little more free thinking. Now, still, that's even more than I would probably play on the head. I was playing more like as if he was going to blow. So now we're just going to play the tune. I'm going to play it in a loose way and mix it up. And go ahead and blow it too. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So, because his time, he's got internal time. Like he can play all by himself, and actually you can feel the time. I don't have to play. That's a luxury. Not everybody you play with has that. But you notice that I was able to just sort of set things down. If I wanted to really dig in and play just like really straight, I could do it. Or I could let some space go by and let a note hang, and he's not going to get along. He's still going along and creating. Yet we're not, hopefully, marking the time so much that it's so obvious what we're doing. It's the idea of letting it flow, and a lot of the way you touch the bass and the way you articulate is going to create that too. Not everything you do you want to you don't want to punch it out all the time, going, look, I'm playing triplets against the, and it's like you got to kind of pick your spots and try to be a little sneakier than that.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you're playing with a drummer, is it a give and take thing with who picks what kind of rhythm to displace, or who's playing against who, or is it an equal distribution of?
Depends on the music and the drummer. Some guys are very I'm going in this weekend to start a new record, and the guy that plays in my band a lot is Horacio El Negro Hernandez, great Cuban drummer. He's very I don't know how to describe it. Besides being an unbelievable virtuoso, he's got a great feel and it's very liquid. He can play a lot of different kinds of music, and I feel very loose. The exchange is wide open. Also with guys like Brian Blade and different guys like that. Stuff is liquid is the only word I can say to describe it. It's not a hard and fast rule that you will keep time and I will stretch. It's everybody's kind of playing together. And sometimes with drummers like that, just because I love to hear what they're doing also, and also because I feel like my role is foundational, I'll sort of stay at home a little bit and let them run around. And then sometimes if I feel like the music is open enough and warrants it, I'll just go right on out there with them. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes they'll be playing, they'll get in on something, and we might be hitting a stroke, there's certain, in the medium tempos, you play with Jeff Tane Watts or some of these, swings so hard. And you don't really have to do a whole lot. You can let him do all the little notes inside and play all that Elvin stuff, and you can just sit there. You don't even have to play that many fills. It just feels right to just kind of wow. Just check him out, and converse is true, playing with him and other guys, sometimes it's they'll be just really laying it down and you can add things. It's really on the song and the different personality of the drummer. Jay and I have also played a lot with Billy Drummond, who's really a great drummer also. They have different, these guys have different personalities, and the way they mix it up is different. Sometimes it just feels right for me to play more inside. Because if we're both doing that, it depends on what the soloist is doing too. Right. If the soloist is really trying to get something going, it's really not right for the drummer and the bass player to just sort of pull the rug out and start going left, and the guy's trying to get started, or on the other hand, sometimes the soloist wants you to push them in another direction. Right. So some of it is just knowing who you're playing with and being sensitive to listening to see where they're going and what they want. Sometimes you could be, don't be too hard on yourself. Sometimes you can guess wrong. I mean, you might think that the guy really wanted you to take it easy and not stretch too much, and you might come off the stand and go, yeah, well, I really want to get freer with the music, and you're like, wow, from the way he was playing, it didn't sound like he was going that way, or vice versa. So you just have to kind of you get experience in playing with different guys. Sometimes, your batting average hopefully gets a little better in terms of interpreting where somebody wants to go and providing them with the right foundation. Sometimes it gets wrong. But that's a good question, because there's some classic examples of that, in the Miles Band in the 60s with Ron Carter and Tony Williams. Ron was known for his ability to really stay really strong, while Herbie and Tony really stretched out on stuff underneath the solos. But also, at times, he would really take off and really break it up in incredible ways. It would all be you just make good decisions all the time. They played together all the time. They were really tight, and it was just like one organism. Like you didn't get the feeling after a while that there were four guys. It's just like it was Wayne and well, five actually, right? So they all it was all so organic. You know, everybody was listening to each other and making decisions that seemed to work all the time. So, yeah, Martin.
Talk a little bit about your harmonic contest. Maybe altogether is a good example. Maybe play like an A section pretty in and then
Sure. Yeah.
take it out a little bit.
No problem.
Tell us how you do it.
Okay.
If you know how you do it.
Yeah, right. That's a. Now, what I try to do really at this point in my life is, I've done a lot of studying of harmony, and I did a lot of ear training practice. So what I do is now, whatever with the little fragments of motifs that I'm hearing in my head, I try to play those. Sometimes I'll experiment with shapes, trying different shapes in the hand. Sometimes I'll deliberately, like you say, I'll stay more in, and maybe I'll be more blues rooted, and then I'll feel like really taking it out, and I'll try something else. Harmonically, at this point, you can, once you've sort of gotten used to different chords and stuff, you can choose any note and make it go. And also with tension and release, you can resolve any note. Miles was a master of that. Like even if he hit a note and you could tell maybe he didn't quite intend it, he would make it into like a masterpiece, and then he might even play it again to say, look, I really meant this. But maybe he didn't. But it didn't matter anymore because he made it into like this amazing thing. So I'll try to play a couple of things that are in, and then I'll veer out. And then maybe we'll talk about what I did, because I don't know what I'm going to do yet. 1, 2, 3. Jay was playing some things too that kind of made me think he was some of the major 7 chords. He would get to them and he'd put a sharp 5 on them, and then that's what I ended with right there too. I heard him doing that before, so I played the last chord is a D major, but I played like an F sharp triad over the D major, which is a D major 7 with a sharp 5. That's the sound. So what I'll do is I'll react to, and also at that point, when you're on the fly like that, I'm reacting to not only little motifs that I'm trying to play. You notice I'm trying to like string things together somewhat. I'm also just using a lot of chromatic harmony, like just feeling free to just keep, if I hear a motif, I was just like coming down. There was a half step, whole step thing I was doing. I don't even know where I was. But I kept on taking something and moving it back and then sliding it and then hitting something that was consonant eventually. So there's really, there's no rules at that point if you understand the laws of tension and release. The problem is if you don't know harmony well enough, when you start to stretch out like that, a lot of times you'll choose something and maybe it wasn't what you intended. You just land on a note that you didn't really particularly want, and then if you're not used to resolving all that stuff, then it sounds like a mistake. There's different things. I mean, I can show you some ideas. Like in other words, here's a simple thing you can start on if you want to have first chord of the tune is a D minor, right? Instead of just playing a straight D minor, he's playing some different things. But you can also, I sometimes think of it more like an F major 9 with a plus 11, just like start on the upper extensions of the chord like horn players do. Instead of getting always stuck, bass players a lot of times feel compelled to delineate the root and the bottom of the chord even when they're soloing, when not necessary. We've been doing that for everybody else. Now it's our time to do what we want to do. So sometimes, like play the D minor, I might start up here and like something, there's a concept called triad pairs too. This guy Walt Weiskopf has written some really interesting books. Like using like an F and a G triad alternating and fooling around with that sound. Coltrane did it a lot too. Play the D minor again. This sort of idea where you go. It kind of opens it up. It makes it sound much more intervallically open than just playing on a D minor 7.
And you're still playing the same material.
Yeah, but it really, it changes the way you think about it, and it sounds different, you know. It's the same notes. It's nothing different than all those notes are in a D Dorian scale, but because I'm choosing to step off on a higher part of the chord, I'm starting on the minor third and then going up from there. Even if you play like just play a simple F major 9 on it, it's going to sound a little different. Check it out. Play the D minor 11. You hear Miles play. You know, it has an open thing. It automatically sounds just a little bit more lyrical when you fool around with the higher aspects of the chord. That's what supposedly when they created bebop, that was one of the big things that they went for. All of a sudden, Bird and Monk and Dizzy and all these guys, Bud Powell, they were dealing with the upper structures, what people call the upper structures. Instead of just dealing with just the bottom part of the chord, they were starting a little higher where the colorful tones come in. The 7, the 9, the 11, the 13, you know, all those things that sound great. I mean, you can lay on those chord tones and play almost nothing else, and I'll show you that right now in a solo, and it'll sound very lyrical somehow because those sounds are very, I don't know, there's something very pleasing about them. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Intervals too. You can play with fourths. Play again. Yeah, go ahead and start on the bridge. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kinds of different stuff, a different change. Now we'll start from the top, but in other words, when he plays a different change like that, all of a sudden he was playing like a G11 instead of the D minor, and opened it up and made me play different because all of a sudden, great piano players do this too. This is the thing that used to frustrate me whenever I play with Chick or Herbie, is like, they'd play a tune, and because they were a piano player, they could change the quality of the chord, even though I was playing the same bass note that was the right bass note. They could change, they'd be playing a blues, and all of a sudden they'd be playing minor 11 chords and everything where the normal, and they could create all this hip stuff. And you try to do that when you play, and you don't have the left hand comping for you. You can't do it. The piano's the only instrument that you can radically change everything about the tune except the shell. And I thought, wow, there's got to be a way. I mean, you can imply some stuff. But there's nothing like when he goes through that chord and goes blang, and it's like, whoa, okay. You know, and then it becomes another thing, and it sets you off in another direction. So go ahead. We're going to play that tune, but I don't know what he's going to do, so we'll see what he does. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So he can change the whole color of the tune. I mean, it's like, if he wants, sometimes, you know, I'll be playing with somebody too, and like a piano player will just abandon the whole first eight bars of the tune and play a big pedal chord and just stay on that chord. And you sort of have to be ready for it. You're just like, okay, well, we're going to do that now. Yeah, he could have done that. Flat, like, could have done that too. I mean, you have to just be ready and just react. It just takes a while to do it. I mean, you have to work. I mean, I banged my head against the wall for a long time, just trying to get my ears to really be sensitive and pick up. The first day I sat in that class with David Baker, I thought, that's it, I'm quitting. You know, and it was really hard. He went, bang, sing. And, you know, of course, there were some guys next to me who were wise guys, and they were just like, boom, and nailing it right away. And I was like, okay. Nice ear, John. Yeah, great. You know, they were just burning through the stuff, and I couldn't find the root, man. You know, he was playing all these voicings. The root wasn't in the voicing. You know, and so don't be discouraged sometimes if you like try to get inside this stuff and it's not popping open for you right away. It just takes some time, but it's fun once you start to. It'll come. You just have to put some time in. That's the tricky part.
Do you work on that on the bass or a lot on the piano too?
Let's see. I did a lot of transcription before I had piano together enough. I did it on the bass, horn solos, guitar solos. I would just like, what I used to do was I used to record on a cassette player and just keep rewinding. I never did the slow down to half speed thing. I just would just keep rewinding. It was like masochistic, but it really worked because then I was training myself to hear music in real time. The only problem is when you slow it down to half speed, music never occurs at half speed. So, you know, you become really accurate and you got this great transcription of this solo that you slowed down to half speed, and then you go on the gig and somebody starts doing this to you and you're like, yeah, can we put it on the Marantz Super Scope and slow it down? You know, it just doesn't work that way, you know, nobody's going to wait for you to catch up. You know, and that's the rough part. You know, I remember very clearly starting to go on gigs where piano players knew like 100 million tunes and I knew like 10. And they would want to play them, so they would just, some of them were nice, and they would shadow the root with their pinky, you know, so you could see where they were going. Some just expected you to hear it, you know, so you'd be scuffling the first couple of courses, and then you'd sort of get it together and learn the songs, you know. And my first experience playing with Stan Getz, he called Con Alma.
I remember this.
I told you that. And I didn't know it very well. And he said, okay, we're going to play it anyway. And so the piano player was really nice. It was Frank Scherzeri at the time, and this was out now. And it was this beautiful concert. Everything was going beautifully up to that point. You know, for me, I was so excited playing with Stan Getz. You know, I was like, wow, wow. And then he was like, going on. Like, Stan. 1, 2, 3, you know. And I was like, oh man. So I'm like listening hard, and the piano player sort of like, you know, trying to give me signals and tell me what the changes were, and I learned, you know, that's. I learned at that point that, you know, and at that point I thought my ear was working pretty good, but you know that was not an easy tune to just sort of like. So, that's why you got to have your ear together. I think really when you boil it, if you can distill it down to a couple of things, with playing the bass, I'm a real advocate whether you just play classical music and you don't improvise at all. Your ear should still be good, because when you're playing that music of the great composers, you're going to understand what they're doing so much better if you can hear the difference. And when that's going to really dictate how you play those roots to those chords and those passing notes, because the tensions and the release in that music, if you understand what it is with your ear and your heart, you're going to play that music better. I know some guys that are very involved in chamber music and stuff, and when they come and hang out and hear jazz and everything, they're really like, they say stuff like, well, this is what they should be teaching in the conservatory in terms of also having that, like making people really hear stuff. I think it's really a big deal, because it really influences the way you deal with music. How deep you get inside the music is really this. If this is working, then you can get deeper inside the music. I mean, it doesn't matter how much chops you have, and you can play almost, you know, very little. And if you pick notes that are beautiful against the chord, you don't have to have, you know, you don't have to be able to run around the bass to do that. But you have to have this. This is not optional for improvised music, especially. And that's the trick. Like I said before, if your time and your ears, and also if your ears are together too, you're going to be pickier about your pitch too. You're just naturally going to, because you'll hear how also like different sounds, like with tension notes, like if there are flat nines and things like, you know, when you play them, you might have to play them in different spots. I mean, if you play it straight up, sometimes you might have to push it a little bit or bring it back a little bit and pitch just to sort of fit it in, you know. Especially if you're playing with strings and you're not playing with any piano. Then, boy, pitch changes, you know. People like, you have to get used to it. And that's, you have to have your ears in tune for that, and really listening for that. You can't just play the same all the time, you know. Another question about that sort of stuff.
I've got a question about registers on the bass. For instance, where alone together goes the B minor 7 flat 5. If you're up in the middle register of the bass, a lot of people, that's like no man's land.
Oh, sure.
What do you advocate working on to really get used to that?
Well, this is the thing you should do with your walking lines and also with your blowing. Make yourself play in different, like confine yourself to like little pockets and see if you can improvise the whole solo in that pocket, not just that one chord. So, so I used to practice like all the different sounds, like starting on any note here, being able to play the notes in the scale. Like, let's play Alone Together, and I'll just stay right here. 1, 2, 3. So now I'll do it in another place. I'll do it down here now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Up there and like in different spots, so it's not like, oh yeah, I can. Because what happens with guys on a lot of instruments, especially instruments with frets or a board, is like when the chords go to a specific place, you find yourself gravitating to the same place every time. That's not good, because then you're gonna. That's the kind of stuff that drives me nuts when I'm playing and I go to the same and I'm not that way again. Like, don't do that. You know, it's like, come on, you know, like play something different. You know?
Do you think it would be a good idea to work out the arpeggios in each register? For each
Sure.
chord?
You know, I for a while I was really working on giant steps a lot, and I was like forcing myself to blow on that tune, like just in here, and it was just like really good practice.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't go to those other things that lay good, and like sometimes, you know, once you get used to playing in thumb position, sometimes it's a crutch because notes are close together and you can sort of play like faster tempos. It's easier, you know. But then you come back down here and you have to like, you know, stretch for that stuff. So don't like get stuck in that. That's easy to do. I remember, you know, in my own playing, I have to watch that sometimes because sometimes it's just path of least resistance, you know.
Thanks.
It's tricky. Another one. Another question. Yes.
Well, recording, when you record, how do you use your headphones? Do you
That's a good question.
both sides, or you leave one side to the instrument open, but then you can't really hear,
Right.
not reading the picture, and then I'm always struggling with that.
When I do stuff with, it depends on what kind of date it is. If it's a jazz thing, a lot of times I'll have one on and one half on. Or in a room, like, I'll set the cue mix to where it's low enough where I can still hear myself in the booth or wherever I am and hear everybody. Sometimes if it's like a real rhythmic thing and I'll just have the drums up and maybe I'll have both cans on and I'll just be trying to like feel it and do it that way. It just depends on the piece of music. On a ballad, I'm usually going to try to have one on and at least half cracked so that I can hear my pitch and so that I'm not completely scuffling or playing completely out of tune. Yeah, it depends on the situation. With the bow, you know, playing in sections and stuff and doing recorded music that way, it's never, almost never do I have the left can on. It's just the right can. And I'm just playing. If I need to hear more click or something, if it's one of those things where it's like a lot of happening and you need to play precisely with the click and all that sort of stuff, maybe I'll have it on half, but that's the most it goes. I almost never put them both on because you know how that is. You're playing with the bow and you can't hear anything and you're just going, man, I hope this is... And what happens is you can't hear anything if you're playing right, but then the minute you play out of tune, it's like, you know, it's like, oh, okay, thank you. It's like having a shock thing, you know. Those chain fences with the sensors on the dog. So, yeah, I mean that's a hard thing with the bass, really figuring out that. And it depends on the studio too. Sometimes they have like individual cues that are really good, and you can dial your mix up like the way you want it. And you know, it's equally tricky with the electric bass sometimes because you don't feel sometimes if you don't have an amp with you behind you for. It can be a thin sound and a small sound. If you're sitting in a room and you're in the room with the drums, live in the room, and they're like hammering, and you got this little tiny little bass sound, and you're trying to like play, and you can wind up really overplaying. So you really have to work on this stuff. This is stuff that I learned through a lot of trial and error, a lot of years of just like, oh man, going in the control room, listening to myself. Man, I played too hard. But I couldn't hear. And okay, well, can I get my own cue? No. Okay, well, I have to figure. You have to figure out ways to negotiate all the trials and tribulations of a bass player. But that's a very important question, because especially with this instrument, the pitch. If you can't hear well and you're in a situation where you're recording, man, it's ugly when you can't hear and you're just flying blind or just playing by feeling and you can't hear that much. That's not good. You can't do that. So the other thing too is about pitch in terms of just when I've studied with certain guys, and one of the guys I studied with was John Schaefer, and his idea, which was really a great thing that he taught, was the idea that whenever your hand is in any of these positions, you've got 3 half steps that have to be divided equally. That whole step that you're holding in your hand, whether you're here or there, those 3 half steps have to be divided equally. And so when you do your shifting exercises, your hand has to stay in contact with the bass and you shift with your arm. And you see a lot of guys, I have a lot of students where you go, like when guys are just playing jazz, a lot of times their hands it's doing all these things, and it's pitch-wise, that's just like, it's a liability, because what's happening is you're changing position every time you do a pull-off, and if you let your hand get this far from the bass, it can affect your time adversely, because if it takes your hand that long to get back to the bass, and then you play the next note, you're going to be late. And you might be out of tune as well, because you took your hand completely out of position. So before you sort of knew where that A was, and now it's maybe not certain where it is. So those kind of things that I learned to practice a lot in the mirror too, and watch and really bust myself when the form wasn't happening. Not that you're going to sit there on a gig and be doing this, the whole time, but you want to at least try to cement some of those habits in that are good while you're practicing by yourself. Any question about any other aspects? We've been dealing with a lot of stuff. Yes?
What would you say about the debate about using an amplifier versus you playing with a microphone?
Good question. For me, it depends on the situation again. I've done both. And I'm not a militant guy in either camp. Some guys are like, no amp, no way. Or some guys like, I have to have an amp. And what I do is a lot of times, it depends on the drummer, obviously. If the drummer is able to really tip and play quiet, and it's a smaller group, a lot of times I just go without. I have a microphone too. I have one of those AMT, made by that guy in New Jersey. It's an excellent mic. And I do have one of the David Gage pickups, which are great. Now the technology is getting a lot better. Like this pickup is very natural, the one that David and Ned Steinberger came up with, called the Realist.
What are you listening to these days?
I listen to a lot of stuff. I like Glenn Goldberg variations a lot. Bach's masterpiece. Glenn Gould was an amazing piano player. If you've never heard of him, you should go buy the record. His 1955 debut was Bach's Goldberg variations was revolutionary. He's a great piano player. Unbelievable. He did them again late in life too, and that's supposed to be a great recording too. But Edgar Meyer's, I love Bach. I'm a Bach fanatic. So Edgar Meyer did a recording of some of the cello suites now. That's an incredible recording that every bass player should own. It's on Sony, classical, I think. And I'm always listening to jazz too. I mean, I go in and out of my train periods, where I listen to an incredible amount of Coltrane because I love Train. And I haven't been in one of those for a while, so I'm overdue, I think. And then I like a lot of different things. I like Brazilian music a lot. I love James Brown. Donny Hathaway is one of my absolute heroes, favorite singer kind of guy. I don't know how much if you've ever heard of him, but he was amazing. If you keep your eyes out, I'll be playing with Wayne Shorter quite a bit this year again too. So that's something that will happen in the summer in New York, and also all around. We'll be all over the world. And I'm playing with Roy Haynes more, and some with Mike Roop. So keep your eyes open. Hopefully we'll see you. All right. Thank you very much. Okay.